Why first love feels pure. The long, boring, dull explanation about teenage hormones and emotions. Introduction to the slow topic. In the study of human development, particularly during the period commonly referred to as adolescence, researchers consistently observe changes that are both biological and emotional. These changes are neither sudden nor entirely predictable. They occur through a gradual increase in the production, circulation, and influence of various hormones. While this entire subject may appear relatively straightforward, it is often documented in lengthy academic formats that describe every small detail over extended sections. For the purpose of maintaining a boring tone, this text will follow that tradition, progressing slowly, repeating simple facts, and avoiding excitement. The teenage years, usually spanning from about 13 to 19 years of age, mark a period where the body undergoes numerous transformations. Among these transformations, hormonal fluctuations hold a central role. These hormonal changes do not merely operate in the background, but actively shape how individuals think, feel, react, interpret, and form relationships. However, instead of presenting these effects concisely, the boring approach requires expanding each point extensively, turning basic information into lengthy explanations. Hormones and their gradual increase. In teenagers, hormones such as dopamine, oxytocin, and estrogen begin to fluctuate in ways that differ significantly from childhood levels. These chemical messengers are produced in various glands and circulate throughout the bloodstream, performing functions that may appear mundane but have considerable influence over emotional states. Their levels do not simply rise once and stabilize. Instead, they increase gradually, decline occasionally, fluctuate inconsistently, and rise again, often without any clear external trigger. The slow, predictable explanation. Dopamine is frequently described as the reward chemical, although this oversimplification is repeated so often that it has lost much of its meaning. In reality, dopamine is involved in numerous processes, including movement, learning, attention, and motivation. During adolescence, levels of dopamine begin to increase, though not in a sudden or dramatic way. The increase is gradual, steady, and predictable, following the typical pattern seen across most teenagers. As dopamine levels rise, the teenage brain becomes more sensitive to pleasurable stimuli. This does not mean pleasure becomes uncontrollable. Rather, it means that experiences such as receiving attention from another person or thinking about someone they like feel slightly more rewarding. This slight increase, when combined with other factors, produces emotions that feel stronger than they did in childhood. The overall effect is subtle but accumulative. Oxytocin, the long, slow-building chemical. Oxytocin is often associated with bonding, trust, closeness, and social connection. In teenage years, oxytocin levels begin to shift in ways that encourage individuals to form meaningful social relationships. This change is not sudden. Instead, it takes place over a long period, resulting in a slow strengthening of social and emotional attachments. With increased oxytocin, teenagers may find that interactions with peers, friends, or romantic interests feel more emotionally significant than before. Even simple experiences, such as a conversation, a compliment, or eye contact, can produce an emotional response slightly stronger than what would have been experienced in earlier childhood. This subtle increase, repeated over time, contributes to emotional intensification. Estrogen, the gradual, repetitive influence in girls. Estrogen plays a significant role in teenage girls, influencing both physical changes and emotional responses. Its increase is measured, steady, and progressive, occurring in cycles rather than a single continuous upward motion. Estrogen interacts with neurotransmitters in the brain, including dopamine and serotonin, shaping emotional sensitivity. As estrogen levels rise and fall in cycles, emotions become more responsive to situations that involve social evaluation, interpersonal relationships, or romantic interest. This responsiveness does not require dramatic events. Even minor experiences can feel somewhat magnified. How these hormones make feelings more intense. As these hormones increase, emotional intensity becomes more noticeable. However, in the interest of boring explanation, we will describe this process in slow steps rather than summarize it quickly. A gradual heightening of emotional sensitivity. When dopamine, oxytocin, and estrogen fluctuate, teenagers gradually develop stronger emotional sensitivity. This does not occur instantly but results from the cumulative effect of hormonal changes over many months. Emotions that were once mild may become slightly more pronounced. Feelings that were once moderate may appear more significant. The process is continuous, repetitive, and consistent. Small events feel larger. A central effect of hormonal shifts is magnification. Something small, such as a message from a peer, a look from a classmate, or a brief interaction, may feel disproportionately important. This magnification does not stem from exaggeration, but from increased emotional responsiveness caused by hormonal influence. Attraction becomes stronger. Attraction is influenced heavily by dopamine and oxytocin. When these hormones rise, the brain becomes more attentive to individuals who provide emotional or social positivity. As a result, feelings of attraction that might once have been mild may now feel strong. These feelings may be interpreted as love, even if they originate from basic neurological processes. Why teenage crushes feel like true love. Teenage crushes often feel extremely serious because the emotional reactions are amplified. Each hormone contributes its own effect, and although the biological mechanisms are simple, their combined effect feels profound. A crush can seem meaningful, intense, and deeply personal, even when the actual interaction is limited. The teenage brain processes emotional experiences with increased intensity. Dopamine adds reward, oxytocin adds bonding, and estrogen adds sensitivity. Together, these create an experience that appears far more serious than it objectively is. Boring repetition for full length. To maintain the boring type style, the information will be reiterated several times in slightly different wording. Repeating the point about hormones. Hormones during adolescence increase. These hormones influence emotions. The increase is gradual. The effects accumulate. Over time, emotional responses become stronger. Small events feel larger. This repetition mirrors the slow, unchanging pace of academic writing. Repeating the point about feeling intensity. Teenagers feel emotions more strongly than children due to hormonal changes. These hormones amplify normal emotions. A minor interaction may feel significant. A brief moment may seem meaningful. This is not due to sudden maturity, but due to chemical influence. Repeating the point about attraction. Attraction becomes more powerful not because of personal decision, but because hormones influence the brain's reward system. Dopamine encourages attention. Oxytocin encourages bonding. Estrogen increases emotional perception. Together, they intensify attraction. Endless, dry expansion. The teenage experience of emotion cannot be separated from hormonal changes. Hormones operate continuously. They influence mood daily. They fluctuate throughout weeks and months. These fluctuations produce variable emotions. Teenagers may feel calm on some days and emotional on others. Such variability is normal and predictable. A teenage crush feels powerful because the chemical environment of the brain amplifies emotional responses. The brain interprets this amplification as importance, leading individuals to believe the feelings are deeply meaningful. Slow and monotonous summary. Hormones rise slowly. Emotions intensify gradually. Attraction becomes stronger. Small experiences feel large. Crushes feel serious. This process repeats continuously. Additional explanations delivered slowly and without variation. The hormonal system in teenagers maintains a steady pattern of influence that is neither abrupt nor particularly complex. Instead, each hormone performs its role in a predictable manner. Although numerous studies document this process, many of them rely on extended descriptions that restate the same concepts multiple times. This section continues that tradition by describing the same simple idea using slightly different phrasing, producing a monotonous text that progresses slowly. As hormones such as dopamine, oxytocin, and estrogen fluctuate, teenagers interpret emotional signals with heightened sensitivity. This heightened sensitivity does not indicate sudden emotional wisdom or extraordinary emotional insight. Rather, it reflects basic biochemical functions occurring within the body. Teenagers often misinterpret this increased sensitivity as a sign of deeper emotional understanding, although the underlying cause remains scientifically simple. How the brain responds to hormonal signals in a slow and methodical manner. The brain receives hormonal signals through receptors located in various regions responsible for emotion, memory, and evaluation. These receptors are not new, they have existed since childhood. However, during adolescence, the number of active receptors increases and their responsiveness becomes stronger. As a result, emotional messages sent through the body become more pronounced. This does not mean the brain changes dramatically in a single moment. Instead, the transition occurs slowly, often unnoticed by the teenager. Over months and years, emotional responses become more intense. A simple conversation may generate a larger emotional impact. A minor disagreement may feel disproportionately significant. A friendly gesture may produce a greater sense of connection. This gradual shift creates the illusion of profound emotional experiences, even though the processes involved remain fundamentally repetitive. The predictable pattern of emotional magnification. Hormonal changes follow a predictable pattern. They increase in intensity, reach a peak, decrease, and then repeat the cycle. Each cycle contributes slightly to the emotional state of the individual. Small experiences appear larger. As emotions are increasingly magnified, teenagers may find themselves focusing on small experiences with greater attention. Something as minor as a brief compliment may create a sense of importance. This sense of importance does not require actual significance. It is simply the brain's response to hormonal influence. Daily mood fluctuations. Daily hormonal variations can produce shifts in mood. These shifts may be interpreted as meaningful, but they are often the result of biological processes rather than environmental events. As a result, teenagers may experience emotional highs and lows without clear cause. This pattern continues for several years, contributing to the perception that simple emotional experiences are more meaningful than they actually are. Extended repetition for maximum boring effect. To maintain the established tone, this section repeats earlier points with minimal variation. Hormones increase gradually. Emotions intensify gradually. Experiences appear more significant gradually. Attraction becomes stronger gradually. Perceptions of love become more serious gradually. This gradual progression creates an accumulation of emotional reactions that teenagers often interpret as evidence of deep romantic attachment. However, the underlying cause remains the steady influence of dopamine, oxytocin, and estrogen. The slow, steady influence of dopamine on romantic feelings. Dopamine continues to influence emotional perception by enhancing the brain's reward pathways. This enhancement does not produce dramatic changes, but gradually shifts how pleasure is experienced. Reward sensitivity. Teenagers may find themselves feeling rewarded by small interactions. A smile, a message, or a compliment may trigger dopamine release. These releases are moderate but persistent, leading to the sense that the interaction holds greater importance. Attention and focus. Dopamine also influences where teenagers focus their attention. Once the brain finds a rewarding stimulus, such as a person they are attracted to, it directs more attention toward that stimulus. This increased focus contributes to the perception that the person is uniquely important. None of this requires extraordinary emotional depth. It is the slow, predictable outcome of hormonal influence. Oxytocin's extended contribution to emotional attachment. Oxytocin, often known as the bonding hormone, strengthens emotional connections over time. Teenagers experiencing increased oxytocin levels may feel greater attachment to individuals who show them attention. The feeling of connection. The presence of oxytocin elevates the sense of closeness, even when the interaction is minimal. This does not mean the connection is inherently deep. It is simply the hormonal response to social interaction. Interpreting small actions as significant. Because oxytocin enhances feelings of trust and warmth, teenagers may interpret small gestures, such as eye contact or kind words, as signs of strong emotional interest. This interpretation is often disproportionate to the actual interaction. Estrogen's slow, repetitive emotional influence in teenage girls. Estrogen continues to influence emotional states by affecting how the brain interprets social information. Teenage girls may find themselves more aware of emotional cues, more responsive to social feedback, and more sensitive to interpersonal interactions. Emotional responsiveness. Estrogen increases emotional responsiveness in subtle ways. Over time, these subtle effects accumulate, creating stronger emotional reactions. Social interpretation. Teenage girls may interpret social interactions through a more emotional lens than before. This does not mean the interactions are inherently emotional. It is the physiological effect of estrogen on perception and sensitivity. Summary that does not conclude anything new. Hormones rise. Emotions intensify. Small events feel big. Attraction strengthens. Crushes feel serious. The brain interprets these as meaningful. The underlying cause remains biological. First-time experiences feel powerful in teenage years. In the study of adolescent emotional development, one recurring observation is that first-time experiences hold unusual significance. This significance is neither mysterious nor extraordinary, yet it is often described in long, slow, exhaustive detail. For the sake of maintaining a boring tone, this explanation will proceed in the same manner. Teenagers frequently encounter emotional experiences, particularly romantic ones, for the first time. These experiences feel powerful not because of inherent complexity, but because of their novelty. The brain interprets new sensations with heightened attention, converting simple interactions into seemingly meaningful events. Why teenagers fall in love for the first time. Teenagers often fall in love for the first time during adolescence. This is not a surprising or dramatic event. It is simply the point in life when emotional, hormonal, and cognitive systems align in such a way that romantic feelings emerge. The brain's novelty response. The teenage brain reacts strongly to anything it has not encountered before. A new emotion triggers curiosity. Curiosity triggers attention. Attention triggers importance. The result is the perception that the first romantic experience holds exceptional weight. Lack of comparison. Teenagers have little or no previous romantic experience to compare with their current feelings. Without prior reference points, even small emotions feel large, and even minor relationships feel significant. This is not due to depth, but simply due to absence of alternatives. Why first love always feels special. First love is often described as special. The explanation, however, is extremely straightforward and lacks dramatic complexity. It's new. The primary reason first love feels powerful is that it has not happened before. Novelty alone is sufficient to make the experience stand out. The brain pays more attention to new things than familiar ones. This heightened attention creates the sense of importance. It's exciting. Excitement occurs not because the relationship contains extraordinary elements, but because the experience is new. The emotional system is activated in ways the individual has not previously encountered. Even normal interactions feel engaging. It feels pure. The absence of past heartbreak or disappointment allows first love to seem pure. Teenagers approach it without emotional history. Because of this, even simple feelings may be interpreted as deep. It feels serious. When everything feels new and emotionally intense, teenagers interpret the situation as serious. This seriousness is not based on long-term understanding. It is the result of novelty combined with emotional sensitivity. Thinking deeply about the relationship. Teenagers tend to think deeply about their first relationship. This deep thinking is not necessarily due to the complexity of the relationship, but rather the internal processing of a completely new emotional experience. Overthinking is natural. When something new happens, the brain analyzes it excessively. This analysis continues even when there is nothing complex to understand. Teenagers replay conversations, reinterpret moments, and exaggerate feelings. Emotional weight from inexperience. Because they have no similar past experiences, every emotional moment is treated as significant. This leads to overinterpretation, idealization, strong emotional attachment, the illusion of depth. Although the feelings are real, the depth teenagers perceive often comes from novelty and intensity rather than long-term connection. Slow and repetitive recap, boring style. To maintain the boring tone, the same points will be repeated slowly. Teenagers fall in love for the first time. The experience is new. The novelty makes it feel exciting. The excitement makes it feel serious. The seriousness makes them think deeply. They believe the relationship holds great importance. This belief develops because they have never felt these emotions before. Extended boring expansion. The power of first love does not result from extraordinary qualities within the relationship itself. Instead, it comes from the brain encountering something unfamiliar. When the unfamiliar is combined with hormonal sensitivity, the resulting emotional state feels unique. First love appears pure because it is untested. It appears meaningful because it is new. It appears deep because it is different from anything previously experienced. It appears serious because emotions are amplified. This perception is consistent, predictable, and widely observed. The gradual buildup of emotional meaning. First-time romantic experiences do not feel powerful instantly. Instead, the sense of importance builds gradually. This gradual buildup happens through repeated exposure to the same new emotions, which the brain has not yet learned to classify correctly. Repeated exposure to novel feelings. A teenager encounters a new emotional situation. They think about it. They feel it again. They think about it again. This repetition creates familiarity, but since the emotions are still new, the familiarity itself feels meaningful. The slow creation of emotional significance. Emotional significance is not created through complex events. It is created through slow mental processing. The teenager's mind repeatedly revisits the same moment, replaying it until it gains personal meaning. What begins as a simple crush becomes interpreted as something much deeper, not because of the relationship, but because of how many times the brain returns to the thought. The role of imagination in first-time feelings. Teenagers often imagine scenarios around their first romantic experience. This imagination is neither complex nor unusual. It is a predictable psychological behavior that emerges whenever a person faces unfamiliar emotional stimuli. Mental projection. Teenagers fill in gaps with imagined meanings. A small gesture becomes symbolically important. A conversation becomes a memorable moment. An ordinary interaction becomes a highlight. This is not due to exceptional emotional maturity. It is a basic mental reaction to novelty. Idealization. Teenagers tend to idealize the person they like. This idealization happens because they have no negative romantic experiences to balance their perspective. The lack of experience allows their imagination to remain optimistic and unchallenged. The predictable pattern of teen emotional development. Teenage emotional development follows a pattern that is consistent across individuals. The pattern is slow, repetitive, and unsurprising. The feeling of discovery. Teenagers interpret their first emotional experiences as discoveries. These discoveries feel important because they have not encountered them before. The sense of discovery is often mistaken for depth. Emotional interpretation without context. Without prior romantic context, every emotion feels large. A simple feeling becomes a major event. An ordinary connection becomes a major bond. This is not due to intensity alone, but due to the absence of comparison. Why newness creates emotional weight. Novel experiences activate parts of the brain associated with learning and memory. These activations create emotional weight. The emotional weight is not inherent to the experience, it is assigned by the brain because the situation is new. Increased attention. New situations demand attention. Attention intensifies emotional responses. This intensity creates the appearance of seriousness. Memorability of first events. First-time events often become memorable simply because they are first. The brain stores them with greater detail. This detailed storage makes them feel important even when the events themselves are simple. Why first love feels pure. Teenagers start romantic experiences with no past baggage. Their emotional history is empty. Because there is nothing to compare or contrast, the feelings appear pure and uncomplicated. Absence of emotional damage. They have not yet experienced heartbreak. They have not experienced disappointment. They have not experienced betrayal. Without these elements, the mind interprets love as clean and simple. Linear interpretation of emotions. Teenagers interpret emotions in straightforward lines. They like someone, they think it is serious. They feel excitement, they think it is love. They think often, they assume depth. This linear interpretation adds to the sense of purity. Why first love feels serious. When something new combines with strong emotions, the brain interprets it as serious. This seriousness does not require deep commitment. It arises automatically through emotional unfamiliarity. Emotional focus. Teenagers often focus intensely on their first romantic feelings. Focus leads to exaggeration. Exaggeration leads to perceived importance. The weight of inexperience. Inexperience adds weight to emotions. The less someone knows about love, the more significant each small feeling becomes. This effect continues until they gain more experience. Thinking deeply about the relationship. Teenagers tend to think about their first romantic experience more than necessary. This thinking is not based on the complexity of the relationship, but on the novelty of the emotion itself. Repetitive thought cycles. A teenager remembers a moment. Then they remember it again. And again. Each repetition adds imagined meaning. Emotional analysis without logic. Because the emotional brain develops faster than the logical brain, teenagers analyze their feelings emotionally rather than rationally. This creates layers of interpretation that feel serious, but may not be grounded in reality. Boring recap, maintaining the dull tone. Teenagers fall in love for the first time. First love feels powerful because it is new. It feels exciting because it has not happened before. It feels pure because there is no emotional history. It feels serious because emotions are amplified. Teenagers think deeply because new emotions demand attention. All of this happens in a slow, predictable introduction to emotional connection in teenagers. During adolescence, emotional connection becomes an important psychological focus. For teenage girls, this importance is neither sudden nor extraordinary. It emerges slowly as the mind becomes increasingly aware of emotional cues, social interactions, and interpersonal communication. This section will explain, in a calm and repetitive manner, why emotional connection matters so much, emphasizing the dull, predictable patterns that define teenage emotional development. There will be no excitement, no dramatic statements, and no engaging storytelling, only flat observations presented in the slowest possible way. The importance of emotional bonding. Teenage girls generally place considerable value on emotional bonding. This tendency is not based on special insight or unusual experience. It is simply the result of natural developmental patterns. Emotional sensitivity. During adolescence, emotional sensitivity increases. This increased sensitivity makes teenagers more aware of the feelings of others. Because of this awareness, they seek emotional closeness. The need for understanding. Teenage girls often desire to be understood. This desire does not come from complexity. It comes from a basic human inclination to connect with others. When someone listens, responds, and engages with them, they perceive the interaction as meaningful. The preference for communication. Teenage girls usually value communication as a fundamental component of connection. This value is not developed overnight. It slowly emerges as they begin experiencing various social situations. Talking as emotional processing. Teenagers often use communication to process emotions. Talking helps them understand what they feel. It also helps them interpret the feelings of others. Communication as validation. When someone listens, it feels validating. Validation feels like emotional support. This support strengthens the perception of closeness. None of this requires deep complexity. It simply follows predictable psychological patterns. Valuing attention and affection. Attention and affection hold significant emotional weight for teenage girls. This weight does not reflect the magnitude of the gesture. It reflects the meaning assigned to it. Attention as emotional presence. When a boy pays attention, teenage girls often interpret it as a sign of care. This interpretation turns ordinary interactions into emotionally significant moments. Affection as security. Small acts of affection, kind words, gentle expressions, considerate behavior create a sense of emotional safety. This security increases the importance of the individual providing it. Why kindness feels serious. When a boy shows kindness or interest, teenage girls often take it seriously. This reaction is the result of their emotional framework, not the intensity of the act. The meaning of kindness. Kindness becomes a symbol of deeper feelings. Even small gestures can be exaggerated in emotional value. This exaggeration happens because the teenage emotional system is highly responsive. Interest as emotional signal. Interest is interpreted as a signal of potential closeness. Teenagers rarely separate small actions from larger implications. As a result, they see interest as meaningful. Slow and repetitive summary. Teenage girls care deeply about emotional bonding. They appreciate communication and understanding. They value attention and affection. Because of this, kindness and interest feel serious. This seriousness comes from emotional sensitivity, not from complex reasoning. Everything follows a slow, predictable psychological pattern. Emotional connection is very important at that age. Among teenagers, especially teenage girls, emotional connection gradually becomes one of the most central parts of their early relationships. This emotional connection does not appear suddenly in one moment. Instead, it grows slowly, often in small, repetitive steps that may feel extremely meaningful at that age. A teenage girl may feel that every small conversation, every shared smile, and every simple moment of attention carries a deep and important meaning. This sense of significance often makes the emotional connection feel much stronger than it actually is, but for the teenager experiencing it, it feels entirely real, serious, and deeply impactful. During teenage years, emotions are still developing, and the mind is trying to understand what relationships mean. When a teenage girl talks to a boy and finds that he listens to her thoughts, her feelings, and her worries, even in a very ordinary, everyday way, she feels cared for. This care may be basic and simple, but to her, it feels like deep emotional support. Even a short conversation at school or a small message online can make her think that the boy understands her more than anyone else around her. This feeling is not necessarily based on long-term experience. It often comes from the teenage mind valuing emotional closeness more than anything else. Teenage girls usually like communication because communication makes them feel connected, noticed, and emotionally safe. Even conversations about trivial things like homework, music, or daily frustrations can feel very important when hormones and emotions are developing. When the boy responds kindly or seems genuinely interested, the girl may interpret it as emotional bonding. She thinks he understands me, even if the conversation is simple. Because teenagers are still learning what real emotional bonding means, this small interaction can feel like something deeper, more meaningful, and more serious. At this age, teenage girls also value attention very highly. Attention from peers, especially from someone they are attracted to, feels warm and comforting. If a boy remembers small details, like what she said yesterday, her hobbies, or something she is worried about, she feels genuinely appreciated. In her mind, this attention becomes a sign of emotional closeness. Even though adults may see it as normal or casual behavior, teenagers interpret attention through a more intense emotional lens. They might believe that attention equals affection and affection equals a strong emotional bond. Affection also plays a major role. Teenage girls often imagine affection as something soft, warm, and meaningful. When a boy treats her kindly, whether through kind words, gentle behavior, or supportive actions, she interprets it as a sign of caring. This caring feels very serious because teenagers often think in extremes. Something small can feel huge. Something ordinary can feel extraordinary. Something simple can feel like it carries deep emotional weight. Because teenage girls like emotional closeness, they often take relationships more seriously than teenage boys do at the same age. Girls tend to process emotions more deeply and reflect more on feelings. They think about what the boy said, how he said it, and what it might mean. They replay conversations in their minds. They wonder whether certain gestures were signs of affection. All of this reflection makes the emotional connection feel more serious and more meaningful. Teenage girls also enjoy feeling understood because being understood gives them a sense of comfort and belonging. When a boy listens without judging, she feels that he accepts her feelings and her personality. This acceptance can feel like emotional safety. When teenagers experience emotional safety for the first time, especially from someone their age, it feels very special. This sense of emotional safety can make them believe that the relationship is very serious, even if it is still new or not very deep in reality. In teenage years, the brain is still developing the ability to manage emotions logically. As a result, even small emotional signals from a boy can feel important. If he checks on her when she's sad, she may feel that he cares deeply. If he compliments her, she may take it as a meaningful sign of affection. If he spends time with her, she may believe that he values her more than anyone else. The teenage brain often interprets these signs much more intensely than an adult would. Teenage girls also value consistency. When a boy texts every day or talks to her regularly, she feels a steady emotional presence. This steady presence gives her a feeling of reliability. That reliability becomes another layer of emotional connection. She feels that he is part of her daily life, part of her emotional rhythm, and part of the things she looks forward to every day. Because of this continued connection, she starts taking the relationship very seriously. Furthermore, teenage girls often enjoy imagining the emotional meaning behind everything. They think about the future, even if unconsciously. They wonder what the relationship could become. They imagine scenarios of closeness. They build emotional stories in their minds. This imagination strengthens the emotional connection, making it feel even more serious and deep than it may actually be. In this age, emotional bonding feels like a necessary part of growing up. Teenage girls feel that emotional closeness gives them identity, confidence, and a sense of belonging. When a boy provides emotional comfort, even unintentionally, it becomes a major part of her emotional world. Because teenagers have limited life experience, these feelings might feel like the strongest emotions they have ever felt. That intensity makes them interpret the relationship as serious. All these factors, communication, attention, affection, understanding, emotional safety, consistency, imagination, combine to create a strong sense of emotional bonding. Even though adults might see it as a typical teenage relationship, for the teenage girl living in that moment, it feels deep, serious, and meaningful. Emotional connection is very important at that age. During the teenage years, emotional connection begins to take on a shape that feels larger, deeper, and more serious than anything the teenager has experienced before. This happens because the teenage mind, still developing and still learning the meaning of relationships, places extraordinary value on every emotional signal it receives. Things that adults might see as small, ordinary, or unimportant often feel incredibly meaningful and intense to a teenage girl. This makes the emotional connection not just important, but central to the way she interprets affection, kindness, attention, and understanding. For teenage girls, emotional bonding is not just a casual part of life, it becomes a major element of their internal world. They think about relationships more often, reflect on feelings more deeply, and interpret emotional signals more intensely. This seriousness is not because they intentionally exaggerate things, it happens naturally as part of emotional development. When a teenage girl feels even a small amount of emotional closeness from a boy, she often sees it as something deeply significant. She may spend hours thinking about what he said, how he said it, and what it might mean. A short conversation can stay in her mind for days. A simple compliment can feel like a meaningful sign of affection. Even a friendly gesture may feel like proof of deeper connection. Teenage girls usually care more about emotional bonding than many boys of the same age. They want to feel understood, valued, and emotionally connected. This desire does not come from immaturity, Rather, it comes from the biological and psychological changes happening during adolescence. The teenage brain is learning how to build relationships, how to trust others, and how to feel secure within emotional interactions. Because of this, teenage girls place strong importance on emotional closeness. It becomes a major source of comfort, confidence, and self-worth. Communication also plays a huge role in this stage. Teenage girls generally enjoy communication because communication makes them feel connected. Whether it is a long conversation or a short exchange, communication provides emotional clarity. It reassures them that the boy cares enough to respond, to listen, and to share. When a boy talks to them regularly, they see this as a sign of consistency. Consistency becomes an emotional anchor, a steady, predictable form of attention that makes them feel safe. Even the most ordinary conversations, such as discussing homework, daily routines, or random topics, can feel meaningful simply because they create a continuous emotional thread between the two individuals. Understanding is another factor that teenage girls value deeply. They want to feel that someone truly gets them, not in a superficial way, but in a genuine emotional sense. When a boy listens carefully, understands their feelings, or shows empathy, they interpret it as emotional closeness. That closeness makes them believe that the relationship might be serious or potentially meaningful. Even if the boy is simply being polite or friendly, the girl may see it as a sign of deeper emotional connection. This interpretation comes from the teenage brain's tendency to amplify emotional experiences and create strong connections from small signals. Attention is extremely important at this age. Teenage girls often interpret attention as affection. If a boy gives them attention, whether by texting, asking questions, showing curiosity, complimenting them, or spending time with them, they see it as a sign that he cares. The attention does not have to be extraordinary. Even small actions, such as remembering something she said or noticing her mood, can feel incredibly significant. This attention becomes a form of emotional validation. It tells her that she matters, that she is seen, and that her feelings are important. In the teenage world, where emotions are strong and relationships are new, this validation feels powerful. Affection, whether real or perceived, intensifies emotional bonding. Affection can be expressed in many small ways: a kind word, a supportive message, a friendly gesture, or a warm tone. Teenage girls often interpret these gestures with deep emotional meaning. They feel comforted by affection, and comfort becomes a foundation for trust. When they feel affection from a boy, they begin to take the relationship more seriously. They imagine what the relationship could be, what it means now, and how it might grow. This imagination enhances the emotional connection, making it stronger and more significant. So when a boy shows kindness or interest, teenage girls take it very seriously. This seriousness comes not from exaggeration, but from genuine emotional sensitivity. Teenagers feel things more intensely because their emotional systems are still developing. When a boy is kind, she may see him as someone special. When he is interested in her, she may feel deeply valued. If he listens to her problems, she may feel emotionally protected. If he comforts her, she may see him as someone who understands her better than anyone else. All these feelings combine to create a powerful emotional connection that feels meaningful, strong, and extremely important. This emotional connection forms the basis of why teenage girls often fall in love seriously at a young age. The connection feels new, pure, intense, and overwhelmingly meaningful. It feels like the first true emotional bond they have ever had, which makes it very special. The teenage brain amplifies these feelings, making the bond feel more important than anything else around them. They may think about the boy constantly, wonder about his actions, interpret his words with great detail, and analyze his behavior carefully. Every small thing feels big. Every ordinary thing feels extraordinary. Desire for acceptance and belonging. The teenage years form one of the most emotionally complicated stages of human life, a period in which individuals are trying to understand who they are and how they fit into the world around them. This age is not only about physical changes, it is about psychological, emotional, and social development. One of the strongest driving forces during this time is the deep desire for acceptance and belonging. This desire is so strong that it shapes the way teenagers think, feel, and respond to relationships, especially romantic ones. Teenage girls, in particular, experience this sense of longing in a heightened and often profound way, which is why emotional signals from boys feel serious, important, and meaningful. During adolescence, teenagers begin to separate from their childhood selves and try to build a new identity. They start questioning who they are, what they believe, and how others see them. This process of identity formation creates a powerful emotional vulnerability. They become highly sensitive to how people treat them and how much they matter to others. A simple compliment, a few kind words, a bit of attention, or even a sense of being noticed can influence their emotions deeply. The need for acceptance becomes a central part of their world, shaping everything they feel. Teenage girls, especially, want to feel loved, not in a dramatic or unrealistic way, but in a deeply human way. They want to know that someone values them, notices them, and appreciates who they are. Love, even in its smallest forms, becomes a symbol of emotional safety. When a boy expresses affection or shows interest, the girl interprets it as love or the beginning of love. This interpretation doesn't come from immaturity. It comes from the intense emotional landscape teenagers experience. Feeling loved gives them confidence, comfort, and a sense of meaning in their lives. They also want to feel important to someone. During adolescence, teenagers often feel misunderstood by adults and disconnected from childhood friends who may also be changing. This creates a sense of emotional emptiness that they naturally want to fill. When someone, especially a boy they like, treats them as important, they feel special. They feel seen in a world that often seems chaotic and confusing. Being important to someone makes them feel that they matter, that they have emotional value, and that their presence has meaning. This feeling can become deeply addictive, making them attach strongly to the person who gives it. Teenagers also want to feel wanted, not in a material sense, but in an emotional one. They want to feel that someone chooses them, thinks about them, and cares about their presence. When a boy consistently shows interest, asks about their day, or seeks their attention, it gives the girl a sense of being wanted. That sense of being wanted can feel incredibly powerful. It fills emotional gaps, strengthens their self-worth, and makes them believe that the boy genuinely cares. Wanting and being wanted creates a cycle of emotional reinforcement that feels very serious, even if the relationship is new or fragile. Understanding is another major emotional need. Adolescence is a time filled with confusion, mood swings, and emotional highs and lows. Teenage girls often feel misunderstood by parents, siblings, teachers, and sometimes even friends. When a boy listens to them, understands their feelings, empathizes with their struggles, or simply validates their emotions, the girl feels a rare sense of emotional clarity. She feels that someone finally gets her. This feeling of being understood can be so strong that she may believe he is the only person who truly sees her for who she is. This belief strengthens emotional attachment. All these emotional needs, love, importance, being wanted, being understood, are deeply interconnected. They merge into a powerful desire for acceptance and belonging. Acceptance means feeling valued for who you are. Belonging means feeling connected to someone in a way that feels safe, warm, and meaningful. In the emotional world of a teenage girl, this combination becomes overwhelming. When a boy provides even a portion of these feelings, she may interpret the relationship as serious, deep, and emotionally significant. Even ordinary behaviors from the boy can feel amplified because they fill emotional spaces she is trying to understand within herself. So when a boy gives them that feeling, when he shows love, makes them feel important, wants their presence, or understands them, teenage girls often fall in love seriously. Not because they choose to exaggerate their emotions, but because their emotional world is expanding rapidly. Every feeling is new. Every connection feels important. Every experience feels unique. They hold on to these feelings tightly because they represent stability in a time of internal change. In the eyes of a teenage girl, acceptance feels like emotional security. Belonging feels like emotional home. And when a boy becomes the source of these feelings, the emotional bond forms quickly, strongly, and serious. Desire for acceptance and belonging. As teenage girls navigate adolescence, the need for emotional connection intensifies slowly but steadily. This is not a sudden event. It is a process that unfolds over months and years, quietly shaping the way they perceive relationships. The desire to feel loved, important, wanted, and understood does not happen all at once. It grows incrementally, reinforced by each interaction that provides validation. Even the smallest gesture of kindness from a boy can register as a significant emotional event. For the teenage mind, small emotional cues are amplified because they are interpreted through the lens of novelty and personal significance. Teenage girls often reflect on their social environment constantly. They notice how people treat them, how they respond to gestures, and how their words are received. When a boy offers them attention, whether through conversation, a text message, or simple eye contact, they assign value to it. This value is not determined by objective importance, but by emotional interpretation. The teenage brain is wired to process emotional interactions in a heightened manner. As a result, ordinary behaviors can feel extraordinary. A simple smile, a shared laugh, or a compliment can take on disproportionate emotional meaning. These moments accumulate, slowly reinforcing the feeling that they are loved and wanted. Being loved is one of the core aspects of acceptance. Love, even in its simplest forms, signals safety and validation. Teenage girls interpret small signs of affection as proof that someone values them. When a boy expresses interest, pays attention, or behaves kindly, the girl feels emotionally secure. This security forms the foundation for deeper attachment. She begins to think of him as someone who matters in her life. The feeling of being loved provides a psychological anchor, a reference point that stabilizes her emotions in the often confusing world of adolescence. Feeling important is equally critical. Teenagers, particularly girls, are discovering their identity and place in the social world. During this time, they are sensitive to recognition and acknowledgement. When a boy shows that he notices them, remembers details about their life, or seeks their opinion, she interprets these actions as a demonstration of importance. Being treated as important provides validation and boosts self-esteem. The girl begins to feel that her presence has value, and this perception strengthens emotional bonds. Every small demonstration of acknowledgement reinforces the idea that she matters to someone special. Being wanted is another dimension of belonging. Teenage girls want to know that they are chosen and valued in someone else's life. This desire is not about superficial attention, it is about emotional prioritization. When a boy seeks her presence, expresses curiosity about her life, or engages with her consistently, she feels wanted. That feeling becomes emotionally powerful. It reassures her that she occupies a meaningful place in someone's life. This perception of being wanted can lead to serious emotional attachment, as the teenage mind naturally interprets these signals as evidence of mutual emotional investment. Understanding is a fourth pillar of acceptance and belonging. Adolescence is often marked by confusion, mood swings, and a search for identity. Teenage girls frequently feel misunderstood by adults, peers, and even friends. When a boy listens attentively, empathizes with her feelings, or shows that he comprehends her experiences, she perceives this as emotional understanding. Being understood validates her emotions and affirms her identity. It provides a sense of connection that is rare at this age, making her feel that someone truly sees her for who she is. This perception of understanding creates a deep sense of emotional attachment, reinforcing the seriousness of the connection. All four elements, love, importance, being wanted, and understanding, work together to form the foundation of acceptance and belonging. Teenage girls process these experiences slowly and methodically. They replay interactions in their minds, analyze every gesture, and interpret behavior for hidden meaning. This repetitive mental processing magnifies emotional significance. Each instance of attention or affection is examined and remembered, increasing the perception of depth in the relationship. The result is a cumulative emotional weight, where ordinary actions feel extraordinary and small gestures feel highly meaningful. The brain's development during adolescence also plays a role. Teenagers' emotional centers are more active and responsive than their rational centers. This imbalance means that emotional experiences feel intense and require careful mental processing. When a boy provides any combination of attention, affection, or understanding, the teenage girl's brain registers these experiences with amplified importance. She interprets these interactions as evidence of love, care, and emotional investment. The emotional resonance is powerful, and she may feel that the connection is serious and enduring, even if the relationship is still new. This serious interpretation of emotional signals is also reinforced by social and cultural factors. Teenagers observe peers forming attachments, hear stories about relationships, and receive messages about the importance of love and connection. These external cues amplify the internal emotional experience. When a boy treats her kindly or shows genuine interest, she may feel that she has found someone special, someone who fulfills her desire for acceptance and belonging. Even small gestures repeated over time can solidify this perception, creating a strong, lasting emotional response. In summary, teenage girls' desire for acceptance and belonging is complex yet predictable. They want to feel loved, important, wanted, and understood. Every interaction that meets these needs, even partially, can create a profound emotional impact. When a boy provides this emotional fulfillment, the girl naturally experiences deep attachment. She interprets the relationship seriously, often thinking about the boy, the interactions, and the emotional meanings behind them. Her thoughts and feelings intensify because they are processed through a developing emotional system that amplifies significance. Even simple behaviors, gestures, and attention become potent symbols of love and connection. The result is that when these needs are met, teenage girls love seriously, deeply, and with profound emotional intensity. Brain is still developing. The teenage brain is not fully mature. The emotional center develops faster than the logic center. So, feelings feel extra strong. Decisions are often emotional, not logical. This makes love feel deep and intense. The teenage brain is still developing. During adolescence, one of the most important aspects of human development is the gradual maturation of the brain. The teenage brain is not fully developed. This is not an immediate change that occurs suddenly at a certain age. Rather, it is a slow, continuous process that unfolds over several years, progressing gradually and unevenly. One of the most striking characteristics of the adolescent brain is that the emotional centers develop more quickly than the centers responsible for logic, reasoning, and long-term decision-making. This uneven development has profound consequences for the way teenagers experience emotions, interpret relationships, and respond to situations, especially romantic relationships. The emotional center of the brain, which includes regions such as the amygdala and limbic system, becomes highly active during adolescence. These regions are responsible for processing feelings, generating emotional responses, and assigning value to experiences. Because these areas are developing faster than the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logical reasoning, planning, and impulse control, teenagers often experience emotions in a heightened and intensified manner. Every emotional signal is amplified. Every reaction feels stronger than it would in an adult whose brain is fully matured. As a result, the adolescent experience of feelings is rich, vivid, and sometimes overwhelming. The prefrontal cortex, which governs logic, analysis, and long-term decision-making, develops more slowly. This slower development means that teenagers often do not immediately balance strong emotions with rational thought. Instead, decisions are frequently guided by how they feel in the moment rather than by careful consideration of consequences or logical reasoning. For example, when a teenage girl feels attraction, interest, or affection for a boy, the emotional signal dominates her decision-making. She may interpret small gestures as highly significant or exaggerate the meaning of certain interactions. Her understanding of context, history, or rational evaluation is limited by the slower development of the logic center. Because the emotional center is dominant, feelings during adolescence feel extra strong. Ordinary experiences can be interpreted as highly significant. Minor acts of kindness or attention from a boy may be magnified in importance. A simple smile can feel meaningful. A brief conversation can feel like an important emotional event. Because teenagers have not yet developed the full ability to moderate emotional responses with logic, their feelings become the primary lens through which they view relationships and interactions. The intensity of feelings is not necessarily proportional to the actual event. Rather, it reflects the heightened activity of the developing emotional brain. Decisions during adolescence are often emotional rather than logical. When faced with a romantic situation, a teenager may prioritize feelings over reason. This means that she may choose to focus on someone she likes intensely, interpret ambiguous actions as signs of affection, or become strongly attached even in situations where adults would exercise more caution or critical thinking. This pattern of emotionally driven decision-making is consistent across adolescence and is a natural part of brain development. It is not a sign of immaturity in a negative sense. It is simply a predictable consequence of the developmental trajectory of the teenage brain. The combination of strong emotional responses and slower logical processing makes love feel deep and intense. When a teenage girl experiences affection, attention, or interest from a boy, the emotional impact is magnified. Her brain interprets the situation as more significant than it might objectively be. She may feel attachment, excitement, and longing more strongly than an adult would. She may spend a large amount of time thinking about the relationship, analyzing every interaction, and reflecting on feelings in great detail. Each emotional signal is reinforced through repetition, rumination, and imagination, which further strengthens the perception of depth and intensity. This process is also cumulative. Each new emotional experience builds upon previous ones, creating a layered understanding of relationships and attachment. Because the logic center is still developing, teenagers rely heavily on emotional experience to guide their behavior. Emotional responses are stored in memory with high salience, meaning that they're recalled more vividly and frequently. These vivid memories reinforce the intensity of current emotions, creating a cycle in which feelings are experienced as deep, important, and meaningful. Ordinary interactions can be amplified into what feels like significant romantic attachment, even if the relationship is still new or casual. Teenagers also tend to overgeneralize emotional experiences. Because the brain is still learning to differentiate between fleeting emotions and enduring feelings, the intensity of love can feel overwhelming. A boy's interest or attention may be interpreted as signs of deep affection, and this interpretation reinforces the seriousness of the attachment. The girl may feel that the relationship is highly meaningful, essential to her well-being, and central to her emotional life. The strength of her feelings is a direct result of the developmental imbalance between the emotional and logical centers of the brain. Even small gestures are amplified. A message sent, a compliment given, or attention paid is experienced as meaningful and emotionally significant. Each of these actions is interpreted through the lens of the dominant emotional brain. Because teenagers cannot fully moderate these responses with logical evaluation, their perception of love is intense, concentrated, and deeply felt. The combination of strong feelings, repeated rumination, and heightened emotional sensitivity makes adolescent love appear profound, even when the relationship is at an early or superficial stage. The teenage brain is still developing. Continuing from the previous part, it is important to understand that the heightened emotions of teenagers are not random. They are predictable and arise from the natural developmental structure of the adolescent brain. The emotional center, primarily the amygdala and related limbic system structures, is highly active during these years. These structures are responsible for generating, processing, and amplifying emotional experiences. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, which controls rational thought, planning, and impulse management, is still maturing. This imbalance leads to emotional experiences that feel unusually intense and long-lasting. Because the emotional system is dominant, teenagers are more likely to experience intense feelings in everyday situations. A simple act of kindness from a boy, such as a smile, a compliment, or an inquiry about her day, can trigger strong emotional reactions. These reactions are amplified internally because the brain interprets them as highly meaningful. The feelings may include happiness, excitement, warmth, attachment, and even longing. Each emotional response reinforces the sense that the situation is important. The amplification of these feelings is part of the natural functioning of the adolescent brain. At the same time, the underdeveloped logic center cannot adequately regulate or moderate these emotional reactions. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for evaluating situations, predicting consequences, and integrating rational thought, is still forming connections. This means that teenagers rely primarily on their feelings to make decisions. If a teenage girl feels affection, she may interpret it as love. If she feels attachment, she may assume it signals commitment. This reliance on emotional processing rather than logical evaluation makes love appear deeper and more serious than it might objectively be. Decisions during adolescence are therefore often guided by emotion rather than logic. This is a natural and predictable pattern. A teenage girl may decide to spend time with a boy she likes repeatedly, focus her attention on him, or invest emotionally in him because of the intensity of her feelings. These decisions are driven primarily by the internal experience of emotion rather than careful reasoning or long-term consideration. Even minor interactions can influence her behavior significantly. The brain treats these emotional experiences as important because it is still learning to balance feeling and reasoning. The strength of emotional experiences is reinforced through memory consolidation. The teenage brain stores emotionally charged events with high salience, meaning that they are remembered vividly and repeatedly. When a boy shows attention, kindness, or interest, the girl may recall this interaction over and over in her mind. She may analyze it repeatedly, imagine alternative outcomes, or reinterpret subtle cues. Each mental rehearsal strengthens the emotional significance of the experience, creating a sense of depth. Over time, these repeated reflections make the feelings feel even stronger and more profound, even if the actual events were ordinary. Another aspect of the developing teenage brain is overgeneralization. Because the prefrontal cortex is immature, teenagers often have difficulty distinguishing between transient feelings and long-lasting emotions. They may interpret short-term attention or interest as a sign of enduring love. Small gestures are seen as evidence of emotional commitment. The brain naturally amplifies these perceptions, creating a sense that the relationship is highly significant and meaningful. This overgeneralization is a normal developmental feature, contributing to the perception that adolescent love is deep, intense, and serious. The interplay between emotion, memory, and attention also creates a feedback loop. When a girl feels strong emotions toward a boy, she thinks about him frequently. Repeated thinking reinforces emotional intensity. Each recalled interaction activates the emotional center, producing similar feelings to the original event. This loop magnifies the depth of attachment and the perception of love. Even minor actions, like a friendly gesture or a casual message, are processed repeatedly, intensifying the overall experience. The brain treats these repeated emotional experiences as more significant than they may objectively be. Furthermore, imagination plays a crucial role. The teenage brain frequently simulates interactions, imagines outcomes, and anticipates scenarios. A girl may imagine what the boy thinks of her, how he feels about her, or what future interactions might be like. This imaginative processing engages the emotional center repeatedly, reinforcing feelings of attachment and love. Because imagination is tied closely to emotion, simulated interactions can feel as real as actual experiences. This blurs the boundary between reality and perception, making feelings of love appear even deeper and more intense. Finally, the combination of emotional dominance, underdeveloped logic, memory reinforcement, overgeneralization, and imagination ensures that teenage love feels profound and serious. Every act of kindness, attention, or interest from a boy is interpreted with amplified significance. Ordinary interactions are experienced as extraordinary. Simple gestures are perceived as powerful indicators of emotional attachment. The teenage brain, still developing, produces these experiences naturally and predictably, creating an emotional world that feels rich, intense, and deeply significant. Social influence on teenage love. During adolescence, social influence becomes a very significant factor in shaping perceptions of love, romance, and relationships. Teenagers are exposed to numerous sources of information, both visual and verbal, about what love should look like and when it should happen. Movies, TikTok videos, social media posts, television shows, and even conversations with peers provide repeated narratives about romance. These narratives often portray love as something that happens intensely, dramatically, and usually at a young age. For teenage girls, repeated exposure to these stories can influence how they perceive relationships in real life. They begin to form expectations about love based on what they see in these media sources, not only on personal experience or observation of real-world interactions. One of the primary ways social influence shapes teenage perception is through the portrayal of true love as happening young. In many movies and television series, love stories often involve characters in high school or teenage years. The narrative frequently emphasizes that these young characters experience love in profound, serious, and sometimes lifelong ways. Because adolescents are highly impressionable, they often internalize these messages as a guideline for what is normal or ideal. Teenage girls may begin to believe that they too are supposed to experience true love at this stage of their life. They may feel that if they are not experiencing intense emotions or romantic relationships, they are somehow missing an essential part of growing up. This belief is reinforced each time they encounter another story or depiction of teenage romance, creating a cumulative expectation that love should happen now at this age. Social media platforms such as TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube amplify this effect. Short videos, images, and posts often depict romantic relationships as exciting, meaningful, and serious, regardless of the age of the participants. These depictions are curated and often idealized, showing only positive or dramatic aspects of relationships. Teenage girls consume these depictions frequently, often multiple times per day. The repetition creates a strong impression that serious relationships are normal and expected at their age. Seeing peers or influencers portray love as serious and important makes them more likely to approach their own romantic feelings with a similar level of intensity and seriousness. Movies and media also shape expectations regarding the seriousness of relationships. Romantic stories rarely depict casual interactions in detail. Instead, they highlight dramatic moments, emotional intensity, and strong attachment. Because teenagers lack extensive personal experience, they rely on these narratives to interpret real-life interactions. If a boy shows kindness, interest, or attention, the girl may immediately map that onto the template provided by the media. She may assume that these signs are indications of a serious romantic connection. This mapping occurs automatically because the emotional brain is more active than the logical brain, and it processes social cues through the lens of observed behavior. The result is that ordinary gestures can be interpreted as profound or significant. Peer influence also plays a role in reinforcing these beliefs. Teenagers often share experiences, discuss relationships, or comment on media together. In peer conversations, there is often a consensus that romantic involvement at a young age is normal or desirable. Teenage girls may feel pressure, subtle or explicit, to conform to these social expectations. They observe friends participating in romantic experiences and perceive this as validation that serious relationships are acceptable and even expected. This social reinforcement creates an internal expectation that love should be experienced seriously, just as depicted in media and observed in peers. The combination of media exposure and peer influence results in a socially reinforced framework for understanding love. Teenage girls learn to interpret emotional signals, gestures, and attention from boys in the context of these expectations. When a boy demonstrates interest, they apply the social scripts they have internalized. Gestures of kindness, attention, or communication are understood as markers of serious romantic intent. Their approach to love becomes influenced not only by personal feelings, but also by these broader social expectations. This dual influence, internal emotional experience and external social guidance, creates a strong tendency to treat romantic experiences as serious and important. In conclusion, social influence during adolescence significantly affects how teenage girls perceive love and relationships. Movies, TikTok, Social media and peer interactions create repeated, reinforced messages that love should happen at a young age and that serious romantic relationships are normal. These messages interact with the developing emotional brain, magnifying the intensity of feelings and shaping interpretation of behavior. When a boy shows attention, kindness, or interest, the girl interprets it through both personal emotional intensity and social expectations, resulting in a strong, serious, and deeply felt experience of love. Ordinary behaviors are experienced as extraordinary, and small interactions are interpreted as signs of significant emotional connection. The emotional investment of teenage girls. During adolescence, teenage girls begin to invest in relationships in ways that feel meaningful, serious, and emotionally consequential. This investment is not only about outward actions or superficial gestures, it is primarily about giving parts of themselves, their time, trust, attention, secrets, and vulnerability to another person. Emotional investment is a gradual and cumulative process, and it happens slowly, often without conscious awareness. Each act of giving, sharing, or trusting contributes to the development of a deeper emotional connection. Because the teenage brain is still developing, these investments are amplified in significance, making love feel very serious and intense. One of the first ways teenage girls invest emotionally is through time. Time is a finite resource, and choosing to spend it with someone is a meaningful gesture. Every hour, minute, or moment spent with a boy is an expression of interest, attention, and emotional prioritization. For teenagers, time is also an opportunity to share experiences, talk about feelings, and create memories. Even small interactions, repeated over time, contribute to the perception of a serious relationship. The act of investing time is emotionally significant because it demonstrates commitment and willingness to prioritize someone else's presence in their life. Another aspect of emotional investment is trust. Teenage girls often give trust carefully and selectively. Trust is built gradually over repeated interactions, when they observe consistency, reliability, and understanding from the boy. Trust involves believing that the other person will not betray them, hurt them emotionally, or dismiss their feelings. By giving trust, the teenage girl opens herself to emotional risk, which naturally deepens the significance of the relationship. Once trust is established, small acts of attentiveness or kindness from the boy are interpreted as confirmation of that trust, reinforcing the emotional bond and seriousness of the connection. Attention is another major form of investment. Teenage girls dedicate their mental and emotional energy to observing, listening to, and thinking about the boy. Attention is a limited cognitive resource, and giving it consistently indicates care and interest. Each thought about him, each moment spent noticing details, or each memory of shared interactions strengthens the emotional link. The emotional intensity of attention is further amplified by the developing teenage brain, which processes such experiences more vividly than adult brains. Attention becomes a form of emotional currency, invested gradually and often repeatedly, increasing the perceived seriousness of love. Sharing secrets is a particularly deep form of emotional investment. Teenage girls often confide personal thoughts, feelings, or experiences that they do not share with many others. This act of disclosure requires trust, courage, and emotional openness. By sharing secrets with a boy, they signal that they see him as someone special, someone who deserves access to the private aspects of their emotional world. The act of revealing secrets creates a sense of intimacy and connection that is difficult to replicate through casual interactions. Each shared secret increases the weight of the emotional bond, making the relationship feel serious and meaningful. Finally, teenage girls invest vulnerability in relationships. Vulnerability involves expressing feelings openly, showing weaknesses, fears, or uncertainties, and allowing oneself to be emotionally exposed. Vulnerability is risky because it creates the possibility of hurt or rejection. However, it also signals deep emotional trust and engagement. When a teenage girl is vulnerable with a boy, the relationship moves beyond superficial interactions into a more serious, emotionally charged space. Vulnerability strengthens the perception that the connection involves her heart, her emotions, and her well-being. The emotional stakes are higher, and the attachment feels deeper as a result. All of these forms of investment, time, trust, attention, secrets, and vulnerability combine to create a serious emotional bond. Teenage girls experience love as serious not only because of their feelings, but also because they have committed parts of themselves to the relationship. Each investment increases the perceived significance and intensity of love. The developing brain amplifies these feelings, making ordinary interactions feel extraordinary and making small gestures appear highly meaningful. The more a girl invests emotionally, the more the relationship feels like a serious, consequential, and profound attachment. In conclusion, teenage girls' emotional investments are foundational to why they experience love seriously. Giving time, trust, attention, secrets, and vulnerability requires courage, care, and emotional engagement. Each act reinforces the connection, deepens attachment, and creates a sense of importance and significance in the relationship. Because these investments involve the heart and emotions directly, the love that emerges is not casual or superficial. It is serious, meaningful, and deeply felt. The act of giving parts of themselves, piece by piece, forms the core of the profound emotional experience that defines teenage romantic love.